actually I haven't done much speaking on the Lefebvre velocipede for a long time. I've had a 40-year contact with this machine. The machine is next door in the museum, you can see it. It would have been nice to have it here, but there you go. It's hard to move. The big question is, what are we looking at in terms of the actual historical, not provenance, but the manufacturer. We know about the provenance of the machine, meaning where it came from to here. What we don't know about, and we have a whole lot of questions about, is when it was made. We know who it was made by. The big question is when it was made and where. And I'll try, the story is a little complicated, and I'll have to watch the clock and go somewhat quickly. I have got a small book here that I published some time ago that explores many of the same issues that I'm going to be outlining. This is hard to get. I xeroxed out the pages from that book concerning the Lefebvre velocipede, and I have 10 copies of it, so first come, first served. I was looking through my file just the other day and thinking about 1975 when I first had the... Actually, don't give it out now because people will read it and it's not going to help. 1975, when I first had the contact with the machine, I was on the East Coast and I had discovered that Alexander Lefebvre's granddaughter was still alive and in a hospital in Saugerties, New York. And I went out there to visit her. This was November 1975, and she was 97 years old. I had a hard time interviewing her, but I had a good clear tape and I transcribed it. And I was just wanted to read you something because this is actually the closest, other than the machine itself, that we're going to get to this man in terms of actual physical contact. So I was sitting there, this extremely ancient lady in bed, and I'm trying to get some kind of answers from her. What do you know about the bicycle? These are my questions and answers. Well, I only know what you said was very true. I wasn't during his time, naturally. I cannot tell you much about him. I knew him, though. I knew my grandfather. He was a very good-looking gentleman. But that don't mean anything to you for the museum. Nothing for the museum that I can tell you. And it goes on like this. Do you know whether he brought the bicycle to California with him? Well, he had the museum when he had the bicycle when he when he came to America. And I have written in parentheses after that, unhesitatingly. Where did he live before he came to America? Saint Denis. That's all very clear and very good. The story is really very good because he lived in Saint Denis. So did my mother, and then blah, blah, blah. And she goes on and on. Did they come around Cape Horn? They came around, they didn't have any of these high-class steamships. When he did, they came around, So she leaves it very vague whether he came across country or whether he came around the Horn. Later on she says it took 3 months. If it took 3 months, they came around the Horn. Did he bring this velocipede with him, or did he make it in California later? It's the big question. When he was working in Saint Denis, what was his job? My question. Well, he was just a mechanic, a high-class mechanic, an inventor. I would call him an inventor. I think he was more or less what we call an inventor, according to my mother. So this, when I was reading this and I was saying, I haven't read this, and I thought, this is the real stuff of history. You know, you're in front of somebody, you've got a tape recorder, you're asking questions, sometimes you don't know what you're going to get. But going back over this transcript and reading it, I realized that actually I got more than I reckoned that I'd got at that moment. And so I'll leave that. The other thing that I have, which is material, is something that came out, I believe you're going to find this in the San Jose archive. It's an ink written message, letter, short letter, from Estelle, Lefebvre's daughter, to her daughter. And it's very interesting because it shows something. Enclosed here is the ad from Sacramento Bee 1900, blah, blah, blah. And what happened was that they put the bicycle into an exhibit at the California State Fair in Sacramento. And those who want to propose that Estelle, Alexander Lefebvre's daughter, was really pushing this thing to get it recognized will be able to make good work with this. She says, she's talking to her son George, she says, "I don't want to take your time if you are busy, but I think a few lines at this moment to those people who speak of bicycle made in 1863, what will they say of one built in 1842? I think the moment is opportune. Lovingly, Mother." So that would tend to argue that she, Estelle, Alexander's daughter, was kind of trying to promote this bicycle, get recognition for it. But it doesn't really help us answer the question whether it was made in France or whether it was made upon his arrival in America. This is the big question about the nature of this machine. And I won't tell you what I personally think until right at the end. And so if we could have the lights out, I will zip through some images. That's me in my early days with the machine. There is a very interesting medallion on the back of this pedal, which is very unusual and might be the clue to establishing the origin of this bicycle. So that takes me back to 75. Just a brief flick through bicycle history in a relatively simple form. What we're dealing here with the machines that I'm going to be talking about, the Lefebvre and the Macmillan and the other machines, is a kind of an interim period between the hobby horse and the real beginning of the bicycle and the bone shaker velocipede. So, hobby horse, projected, 1820, a fanciful idea. Von Dries, 1820. Macmillan velocipede alleged around about 1840s, same date as the Lefebvre. Standard velocipede bone shaker from about 1869. The front wheel getting bigger, early 1870s. First safety, don't take any notice of that one, don't take any notice of. So then, subsequently, the development through various kinds of rear-driven bicycle velocipedes. That's one. Here's another schematic of the sort of prevailing standard classical history of the bicycle. Hobby horse, bone shaker velocipede, high wheel bicycle, Humber, safety bicycle, about late 1870s, and then this one is actually 1884, and then the standard safety bicycle here. This is just to give you an idea of, now this is a more complicated one that's kind of getting to the heart of this issue. The Lefebvre velocipede is not here, but this is exactly the kind of rear wheel driven machine that we're looking at in exactly the period under consideration, although many of these are in fact earlier, or later than the Lefebvre velocipede. Most of these are dated 68, 69, 70. This is a Macmillan style velocipede, but actually a model of the alleged original Macmillan. And this gets much closer to the important stuff under discussion, because here we have the Lefebvre velocipede these are all, the L5 are all variations of a Macmillan-style velocipede, or alleged Macmillan-style velocipede. Most of them were either made by a man called D.L., that's spelled Dalzell, D-A-L-Z-E-L-L, or by a man called Thomas McCall. The question is, did an original Macmillan machine ever exist from which the various copies were made? We don't have a copy of an original Macmillan velocipede, which makes the whole thing highly problematic. All right, probably all of you here know enough about bicycle history to recognize a standard hobby horse, 1820. Hobby horse riding school in London. Famous image, Cruikshank, 1820. This is a later one by von Drais, the German hobby horse guy, much more scientific, much more directed at carrying luggage and touring around. He was an inspector of a huge property and used that. So that's von Drais. I'm just showing you these so that you get a picture of what precedes the Lefebvre. But in that interim period between about 1820 and 1860, end of 1869, you have a whole variety of what I call machines made by amateur mechanics. They were all people who read mechanics magazines. They thought they could do it. They knew a little bit of blacksmithery. They knew a little bit of carriage trade industry, and experimented very much with basic transmission, either driven by hand or driven by foot. And there are lots of machines like this that can be found in the literature. This is a drawing of the Lefebvre machine. As you can see very briefly, rear wheel bigger than the front wheel, but not by very much. A very characteristic serpent head that is, you can see is still out there. The saddle was probably reconstructed, it's sprung. It has a treadle, up and down treadle mechanism. Most of this is wood. Most of that is metal. The wheels are typically rather sophisticated carriage wheels, but this important thing, of course, is the transmission, which you can see on this is my picture of the actual machine taken long since. This is probably a reconstruction, certainly a reconstruction. That is obviously a stabilizing device. There are spokes missing, but essentially this has probably been replaced, the handle. But essentially what you see here is an unrestored, unaltered version of what came into the possession of the museum. It has not been restored.
Never will be.
Never will be. That's very good to know. So that's a close-up of the, well, restoration with a feather duster, maybe. That's a close-up of the transmission. Okay, I'm going to keep going because now this is fascinating because I found this picture of the machine in a paper goods safe one weekend. I forget even where I found it. I think it was in Berkeley. The machine must have been then in the possession of Estelle Cardenet, the daughter of Alexandre Lefebvre, and this is possibly their backyard, or her backyard, more likely her backyard, because he died 1888, and that picture could be 1888, I don't know, and it's made more interesting by the fact that here we have in the background French bakery, which might enable us to locate that photo by carefully looking at the street directories. So once again, it was complete happenstance that I found this picture, and I didn't pay a lot for it. I just thought, oh my God, it's the Lefebvre velocipede, and I snapped it up. On the reverse, it's a single page image. On the reverse of it is that, a slightly torn picture, and I believe that must be Estelle Cardenet. Alexander Lefebvre's daughter, as a young girl.
Can you go back to the other previous? No, you look at it's got a missing spoke and the stabilizer, the inner wheel or ring on the rear wheel. I mean,
It's exactly the same.
not much different from what it is in 2015.
Makes it a very interesting picture.
Right.
So that if that's Estelle, Alexander's daughter, then okay, he died 1888. It might not be daughter, but it might be granddaughter. I don't know. I have no further information about this picture. But we do know about this picture. This is Estelle, Alexander Lefebvre's daughter, married a man called Cardinet, who was her next door neighbor in San Francisco. And she was a tiny woman, and that picture was published in the Oakland Tribune in 1933, I believe. And so, not long before her death. But it shows, once again, the machine in same condition with the same reinforcements around the back wheel. And so this was the lady who, the sister of the person who I interviewed in, or am I getting that wrong? Is it the mother? Yes, sorry. Okay, here's where we get to a little bit of the serious documentary history. When the Velocipede was given to the museum, along with it came some paperwork. And they are still in the museum. And I'll translate quickly, and then I'll show you well, I have a translation of this document, which is the next. So what happened was that there was a lot of interest in the history of the bicycle during the bike boom of the mid-1890s. And I think within the family, they were reading stuff in the newspapers about the origin of the bicycle. And lots of ideas were being bandied around, all kinds of dates. And at one point, she must have come up with the idea, let's write to San Jose, and we'll see if we can get them to give us evidence, hard evidence that indeed this machine was made in San Jose. So that's what he says here. You may be able to read it. She writes to the town of Saint Denis, I'm enclosing here the certificate which you asked for in your letter of 7th October. Sorry, this is the response from them. And a plan which has been prepared by Monsieur Lapierre. These two documents are intended to establish the authenticity of our fellow countryman, the late Monsieur Lefebvre's bicycle, which you have in your possession. I hope, blah, blah, blah. So he's an employee in the Secretary's office at the Town Hall of San Jose. And that's the original of that document, a copy of the original. Now this document, which is...
They're claiming that the bicycle was made in France.
She's looking for proof. She wants to have documentary proof that the bicycle was made in France.
Someone from the town of Saint Denis.
Is just outside Paris.
Yeah, and it says it was made there. We give her.
Well, let me continue and you'll see. So this is the details of the response from the Town Hall of Saint Denis, where he says that, I'll go through these, that's the end of it, that's the translation, and that's the plan that they include of the Velocipede. And this plan was made by a man called Monsieur Lapierre. And the translation of that document is here. The mayor of the town of San Denis, hereby officially acknowledges the statement made by Monsieur Ernest Lapierre, 67 years of age, engineer, living in Saint Denis, in response to a request from Madame Estelle Cardinet, née Lefebvre. living at the present time in Santa Rosa, which verifies that the bicycle which she possesses and of which a plan is enclosed was indeed made by her father, Monsieur Alexandre Lefebvre. Monsieur Lapierre confirms that in 1843, when he was apprenticed to Monsieur Lefebvre, who had an engineering shop on the Rue de Fontaine, the latter possessed the bicycle mentioned above, which was made with his own hands, and that he knows that Monsieur Lefebvre made many trips on the machine, one of which he remembers especially well was from Saint-Denis to Havre. This document has been drawn up at the request of Madame Estelle Cardinet, née Lefebvre. Now, on the face of it, it's a pretty extraordinary document. I mean, when you read a document like that, you think, I mean, this is something. The problem is, was it the same machine? Did he bring it with him, or did he make it later? And this is the crux of the historical question about the machine. So let me just go back through these. Okay, that's the letter from them saying that they received her letter and their enclosing document. That's my translation. That's what we call the affidavit. That's the translation of the affidavit. And that's the plan that Lapierre enclosed. Now, if you compare that sketch with the actual machine itself as it exists today, you can see that there are some differences. The question then is, how much could Lapierre have remembered back all those years to have done an accurately remembered question of the transmission? Because the transmission is evidently different here. There are a lot of things that the steering is different, the angle of the front wheel is different. So those who want to be skeptical about the French origin of this machine can latch on to these differences and run with them and say, no, it couldn't have been made in Paris, it must have been made in San Francisco when he arrived, after he arrived in California, without any specific evidence for that. Now this other document here is actually a newspaper clipping from Sacramento Bee, 1900, in which the sketch from the affidavit has been taken and published. And this has various other information about his travels in the United States, in California, and what he may or he may not have done. It doesn't really make a huge difference either way, except that it's very interesting to know that indeed they were keen to show this machine, to expose it in this Sacramento State Fair. And I haven't yet discovered any actual documentation of it being in a catalogue or something like that in Sacramento. So, as far as the specific historical information about Lefebvre, I've just about covered the essentials. But now what I'd like to do is just to give you quickly some comparative stuff about the English developments at the same time. So this involves the same historical period, but essentially what was going on in Scotland. Alexandre Lefebvre, DL, and Thomas, I will get there in a minute. The interesting thing about these two pictures is that by the time you get to the 1930s, 40s, it's pretty much accepted, it's accepted knowledge that somehow or other Kirkpatrick Macmillan Scotsman Macmillan had been kind of enshrined as the quote-unquote inventor of the bicycle. And yet the proof has always been very, very difficult because no machine exists which could be said to be original, to have been made by Macmillan's own hands. What we have is copies of a machine alleged to have been made by Kirkpatrick Macmillan. And one of the things I did in my yellow book over there was to go through all of the cycling periodicals from 1880s and 1890s, tracking every single mention I could find of anything to do with Macmillan or DL or the other people who made copies of Macmillan. And I think the case is persuasive that some kind of knowledge, my folk knowledge of machines was people making copies of machines was going on. And that's what I try to illuminate and make clearer in this study of these sources. This is another ad from the, I think, 1930s or 40s, where, you know, once again, the accepted knowledge is that somehow or other the first bicycle was made in Scotland by Kirkpatrick Macmillan. There's Macmillan himself. Very well documented biography of the man. We know where he was born, where he died, where he worked, who he married, who his children were, where he lived, that he was a working blacksmith. What we don't know is exactly what the machines that he personally made with his own hands looked like. And for that evidence, says Kirkpatrick again, Macmillan's grave is in a place called Penpont, which is fairly near Kilmarnock, not too far south of Glasgow. There he is down at the bottom here. Died January 1878, aged 65 years, inventor of the bicycle, claimed. That's the actual smithy where the invention of the bicycle is alleged to have taken place. That picture was published 1896 and that's the most commonly illustrated replica made by a man called Thomas McCall, who wrote about how he saw Macmillan and he consciously imitated it. And you can see that the main thing to point out here in terms of comparison with the Lefebvre velocipede is the essential similar structure, rear driving. It's a true bicycle, by which I mean a machine that can be balanced, steered, and driven continuously forward in order to maintain balance. In other words, not a hobby horse. This machine can do that. The transmission to the rear wheel is very similar to the Lefebvre. The arrangement of the treadles is different. The rake of the fork is somewhat similar. It has a similar animal head on the front. This machine was a copy of the Macmillan machine and probably made 1869. So that's another McCall copy, which had a very similar, but it also had a breastplate, which the hobby horses had. You could actually lean forward and rest. One of the problems with these machines was the dreaded dead center. They were extremely hard to get going on the flat because you couldn't press down as you can with the pedal. You had the drive was like this. The Lefebvre is actually better because his is driven with an up and down movement. This is the very controversial little piece of history, which was published in various places in the Glasgow press, and which the the pro-Macmillan people will use this in support of Macmillan. The anti-Macmillan people will use it against him because they will say, we don't know what kind of machine it was, he's not named, but it's a very curious. On Wednesday, a gentleman who stated that he came from Thornhill, which is where Macmillan lived, in Dumfries, was placed at the Gorbals police bar, charged with riding along the pavement on a velocipede to the obstruction of the passage, and with having, by so doing, thrown over a child. It appeared from his statement that he had on the day previous come all the way from Old Cumnock, which is next to Thornhill, a distance of 40 miles bestriding the velocipede, and that he had performed the journey in the space of 5 hours. Blah, 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 blah. The child was thrown down, had not sustained any injury. Now, the crucial thing here is the final 6 lines. The velocipede employed in this instance was very ingeniously constructed. It moved on wheels, turned with the hand. Does that mean turned with the hand this way, or wheels turned with the hand? The punctuation is very crucial. By means of crank. But to make it progress appeared to require more labour than will be compensated for by the increase of speed. This invention will not supersede the railroads. The journalist adds cutely. So it's a very problematic historical text. I mean, we can find it. All of these reports, I think there are 3 or 4 instances where this is published, all in 1842. But the thing remains that we don't know what the machine looked like, and we don't have a name attached to it, only that we know he came from Thornhill. Now, in my mind, that's good enough proof. If you don't want to believe it, it's not proof. Macmillan's family, sister, these people were quite crucial, actually, in bringing down some of the reports that have come down to us in the press. Now, this man, James Johnson, is quite important because he was the one who took up Macmillan and ran with Macmillan. He did all kinds of research, and he went out and he interviewed people. The naysayers for Macmillan want to essentially discount the verbal testimony that Johnston went out and collected. I have paid very, very careful attention to it. It's all published in that yellow book, and I find it personally totally persuasive. But you have to have read it carefully, which I think that most of the naysayers have not done. So here's Johnson. He is saying that the inventor of the bicycle was a Scotsman. And so they say, oh yes, he had an agenda. He was out there looking to prove his agenda, and therefore they discount the testimony that he collected. I've read it, and I pay much more attention to it. These are some of the articles that appeared in the press in Britain. Bicycling News, which was actually the most widely circulated weekly cycling periodical, did an examination. This is Gavin DL, and this is a DL's velocipede, and that's a McCall velocipede. So you can see the similarity between those, both of which have very good claims to have been made as a result of Macmillan's model. So we can look at those and we can say there's a pretty good chance they are substantially like the bicycles that Macmillan made that have not survived. That's Gavin DL, Lesmahaga, from the same publication. There's a close-up of Thomas McCall on his velocipede. When I first started digging around this stuff, I was actually amazed at the amount of stuff that there is. But only reading it very carefully and putting it together very carefully was I able to actually make sense of it. That's a close-up of the same. That originally was a photo from a photograph by Bruce and Howie of Kilmarnock no photo has appeared. That's a DL from a sketch. That was on display in London at the Stanley show in a somewhat battered state. That one is now in the Glasgow Museum, somewhat reconstructed. That's McCall again. That's the battered DL machine. You see, it was illustrated, but the handlebar had completely collapsed. And that's the machine, that DL machine, as it is today, can be seen in the Glasgow Museum of Technology. And that machine might be seen as a rival for the earliest bicycle in existence if it can be conclusively proved that the Lefebvre machine was not made in Paris. If it can be conclusively proved that the Lefebvre machine was made in Paris through materials analysis, then that machine would not any longer be the first, because the Lefebvre machine, you have to assume, when he came to the States in 1860, if the machine is French and he brought it with him, then that's the machine we're looking at out there. That's, I love this picture. This is one of the curators at the Glasgow Museum of Technology. Just so it's your ancestor with the machine, I think just after it was presented to the museum. I love these old photos. There's so much evidence from photographs. Not that we know what the date of it was, but we can wonder very easily, why are those spokes curved? Was it somebody's key signature? Were they just bent, warped, and
On the pedal, or it looks like there's a different hole. There's holes up.
Here.
To go further up. You see some.
Oh, yeah, no, this is true. You can all,
No,
yeah,
down below you see some, as if they could
No,
adjust the reach.
this fulcrum can be altered.
Right. And
And this fulcrum
right.
here can be
Right.
altered. So in effect, you've got gearing on it, or you've got rate of speed. Yeah. Well, I got through the pictures quicker than I thought I would. So this is kind of where we end. Most people will show a picture like this as the beginning of something. But it's kind of, for the purposes of this talk, it's kind of where we end. Because this was, if we accept that the Lefebvre velocipede and Macmillan and DL and McCall were all based on earlier models of a rear-driven vehicle, bicycle. This, of course, is totally different, because this is where cycling technology, this is 1869, this one. This is where bicycle technology is going to head for the next 15, up until the death of the high-wheel bicycle, basically, in the introduction of the safety. It's going to be looking at front-wheel drive, and because the front-wheel drive was so problematic, you had to pedal so fast, you had to steer against your own pedaling, it makes you really wonder, ask the question, well, why were these rear-driven bicycles like Lefebvre and Macmillan and McCall et al., why were they kind of pushed out of the way? And so that's the naysayers who I talked to about the Lefebvre velocipede. In fact, I had a discussion in front of a crowd of people for the International Cycling History Conference, and they were very critical of my work and the conclusions that I had come to. And they said, well, he must have Lefebvre must have made it in San Francisco. And he was inspired by the velocipede mania that was going on in 1869. And say, well, if he made it there, why would he have made it according to a much earlier design that was now proven to be going out of fashion? This was the fashion of the moment. That's where we were all heading. So that's an American studio velocipede picture. So when we get back again, this is a wonderful one. This is Mechanics Pavilion in San Francisco, where they had velocipede racing. So these are either American-made or French velocipedes, but many of them were there. And that's the direction in which the front wheel is going. That was the Lefebvre family. They were a band of entertainment cyclists who were photographed quite frequently in New York City. But from there, that was the direction things were heading. And then here we have this anomaly. It's a total anomaly. Why would he have made a machine like this in San Francisco? It makes no sense at all for him to have done so. So, what really would be wonderful to happen would be a materials analysis of this machine. Samples of the paint, samples of the woodwork. If it proves fairly conclusively that the wood we're dealing with here is French, that the various styles of the metalwork in the rear transmission, in the front transmission, in the hubs, could be positively identified as being French. And my feeling is that there are people who can give answers to these questions. And that would be wonderful if that could happen, and if we could finally come to the conclusion that, yeah, we are dealing with the world's oldest surviving bicycle. And it would be a fantastic coup for the museum if that could be. You'd probably be totally bombarded with tourists suddenly. You'd have to put it in a glass case and so people can't. But unfortunately, the way in the display, you can't really see the medallion. But on the inside pedal, on the underneath, there is a medallion about yay big. Very, very worn, because obviously people's feet have been eroding the sharpness of the image. But there's enough there that it must tell something. Why would there be a medallion on the machine? Why would he have put a medallion? Is it like a trademark? Or is it a something that certifies it? So anyway, lots of questions, and I appreciate your sitting patiently through this rather complex story. And as I say, there is a Xerox thing, a few pages of summary of all the historical information, and I don't want to go on too long because I know there's another talk happening at 3, but I'd be very happy to take any questions if there's anything that you can't make sense of.
You mentioned...
Could somebody put the lights on, please?
And
yeah.
Feel free to go till George gets here. He's not here yet, so just go ahead and carry on.
Yeah, okay, sure.
You mentioned testing of the wood. Somebody earlier today mentioned that possibly that had already been done.
Well, you mentioned it too. Ken mentioned it.
So I'm the curator here responsible for this artifact. That's what I've been told. But there's no, in our records, there's no documentation of a material analysis being done on the velocity. So
That's pretty odd that there's no documentation.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
Maybe it is a rumor.
How did the museum acquire it?
It came, it's in that, so we'll make sure, it came from Alexander Lefebvre's daughter, Estelle, gave it to her daughter. She gave it to her son. And they kept it wherever they lived. They held on to it. And I believe the man who presented it to the museum was called Anderson. And he was a friend of, you said?
Clyde Arbuckle. Clyde Arbuckle was the founder of the museum here.
Yeah.
Who was also member of the Garden Seal Wheelman, a bicycle enthusiast, and so I think that was the connection that the family made with our museum here, was the bicycle. Here's someone who basically Clyde was my predecessor, going back, but there was the interest there that, okay, someone who knows the value of this historical vehicle, that we'll give it to Mr. Orbuckle, and so that's how we ended it up.
Is it likely that someone would have taken something this bulky on the long journey, on a sea journey? Do people usually take their household possessions?
It's a very good question, but if he thought that there was some kind of a future for his invention, then why not put it in a box? It's not that big, and he wasn't that poor. But it's a very legitimate question. But then once again, we get back to the thing I just mentioned, which was, if he left it behind and went to make it again here, why would he have made it in that style?
Because it wasn't a velocity.
Because as yet there was no alternative, might be another answer, but
Or because he thought these Californians were full of it with their velocity.
yeah. But you see, the materials testing will clear up that question. It's absolutely the key to the mystery.
It used to be in a glass case at one time. I have a picture of my old Highlander that was taken in 1977 next to it in a glass case. And on the wall was that big poster of a large gathering of the wheelmen. And it was for the Heart Association.
I don't remember that.
Well, the photos were never.
So the bicycle, since it's arrived here at the museum, has been on display at a number of venues through the last 40, 50 years. I believe in the late 70s, early 80s, there was an exhibit at the California History Center in De Anza College, where so anyway, it was on display there. Now, whether or not it was in a glass case at that point, I don't recall, but I do know that it's been on display at various other museums here.
My photos I have were taken for the local Heart Association. They were putting on a charity ride, and they wanted publicity shots, and so we agreed to bring my Highlander, which was in its condition when I got it, here, and it was taken in this building and outside on this walkway in front of the building, and the picture's really clear to show that it was in front of the glass case.
I think the fact that it stayed in the same family, was treasured by the same family, and passed from person to person within the family, counts for a lot in terms of the credibility of it not being French necessarily, but having been considered a valued, treasured item. And there's no problem at all with the provenance. I mean, with a lot of historical items, you have a huge problem with provenance, paintings and things like, where did that come from? It's crystal clear where it came from. It's all documented. So it's just, that's the question. Did he have it with him when he came?
Yeah.
And that's why I go back to that first thing I read you, the interview with the old lady.
Because the documentation that we have clearly states that the family's had this vehicle at least, until 1892.
Since 1892.
Since 1892.
Why are you picking 1892 as the date?
Well, that was the article that I've seen from the Sacramento Bee regarding her.
Yeah.
Or her.
But I mean, that's not necessarily
So I'll give it
any kind of proof.
5 or 6 years, but the fact that the vehicle that we currently have has been with that family since that time frame.
Yeah.
So what happened before then, we don't know. What I find interesting is when you look at those early pictures that you have with her, and then that newer picture with the fence in the background.
Yeah.
The handlebar, because the handlebar is kind of deteriorated, that shows up in both foot images. That one right there.
Isn't that the same handlebar?
That's the same handlebar.
It's like the same seat, too.
Yeah.
The seat was
You know, that technology was such a big deal during this time period that you could imagine if this were his best one he had made, or the first one. And it's a small item, as you mentioned, to bring even around the horn, because they were bringing wagons around the horn. The first pictures you see are everybody's got their technology out there, especially bicycles. So I see that as a possible.
Well, thank you for coming.
Thank you.
And,